All right, second grade, I'm going to keep reading our chapter book, Chocolate Fever. In our first chapter, we learned about our main character, Henry Green, and how much he loves chocolate. So, let's keep reading. Chapter 2 is A Strange Feeling. Let's see what happens to Henry. Better hurry, kids, Mama Green called from the kitchen. It's almost 8:30. Let's go, Slowpoke, Mark said to Henry. We don't want to be late. And just one more chocolate cookie, said Henry. He popped it into his mouth and, still chewing, went to his room to get his books. On the way to the front door, Henry went through the kitchen and gathered a handful of chocolate kisses to put into his pocket. He liked to have them handy to munch on at school. But this morning, because he still felt somewhat hungry, Henry stripped the silver wrapping from 2 kisses and popped them into his mouth. Then, after a quick kiss for Mama Green, a kiss that left a little bit of chocolate on her face, Henry, Elizabeth, and Mark headed out the door on the way to school. At the corner, Henry and Mark waved goodbye to their sister, who had to take a bus to get to her high school. The boys' school, PS 123, was just another block away. At the corner, Mrs. McIntosh, the crossing guard, waved them across the street. The light is always green for the Greens, she said. It was her own little joke, and she said it just about every morning. This morning, only Mark, who was extremely polite, smiled. Henry just didn't feel like smiling. In fact, he was beginning to feel a little strange. In the schoolyard, the boys went separate ways to join their classes. As usual, there was a lot of pushing and shoving and fooling around. But Henry, who was always very good at things like knocking hats off boys' heads and making goofy faces at girls, was quiet. He didn't even say hi when Michael Burke, his best friend, came along. Well, what's the matter with you? Asked Michael, grinning. What do you mean, what's the matter? Henry said. Can't I just stand here? Do I have to carry on and behave like a nut? Okay, said Michael. You don't have to bite my head off. It's just that you're kind of different today. Not like you at all. Just then the whistle blew and all the children began marching into the school building. I feel funny today, Henry said to Michael. I have the feeling something's going to happen, and I don't know what. That exact feeling, that something was going to happen, stayed with Henry all morning. He felt strange in his homeroom, strange when he went to gym class, and in Mrs. Kimmelfarber's math class, he felt strange all over. Henry couldn't concentrate on what Mrs. Kimmelfarber was saying. He just sort of sat there and stared. Without thinking about it, he was looking at his arm and the back of his hand. And then he noticed something. There were little brown freckles all over his skin. Now this would have been such a startling discovery, except for one thing. Those little brown freckles were not there when he woke up this morning. At the front of the room, Mrs. Kimmelfarber was going through the drill on fractions. She was saying, and if I take 6 1/2 and subtract 1 1/4, what will I have left? She looked directly at Henry, who was looking directly at his arm. Henry, she asked, what will I have left? Little brown spots all over, said Henry. All right, let's see what happens to Henry and these strange freckles on his skin. Chapter 3 is Mrs. Kimmelfarber's problem. There was silence in the room for about 2 seconds. Then there was a riot. All the girls began to giggle. The boys chortled and chuckled and laughed right out loud. Henry turned red, and Mrs. Kimmelfarber, who did not appreciate the humor of it all, turned white. She rapped her ruler against the desk and shouted for silence. Henry Green, she said, what is the meaning? Little brown spots all over, said Henry. I was looking at my arm, and I have these... Little brown spots all over, interrupted Mrs. Kimmelfarber. I heard you quite clearly. But, you see, Mrs. Kimmelfarber, I didn't have them all my life. I didn't even have them this morning, but now... I know, Mrs. Kimmelfarber sighed. Now you have them all over. I'd better have a look at them. Taking Henry's arm, she led him to the window. She said as she peered at the arm. Looks like freckles to me. No, ma'am, said Henry. It just can't be. Why not? Said Mrs. Kimmelfarber. Because I have clear and delicate skin, like my mother. Is that so? Mrs. Kimmelfarber said. And who told you that, pray tell? My father? Ah, said Mrs. Kimmelfarber, exactly. Now you are sure you didn't observe this phenomenon before this morning? If that means I didn't see them, said Henry. No, I didn't. Well then, she said, you, Henry Green, stand right where you are. In class, she said, turning to face the room, you will continue to look at your books until I return. In perfect silence, she added. And she went out into the hall. Henry stood, as told, while the class looked at him. Mrs. Kimmelfarber walked the few steps down the hall to Mr. Penglow's room. She looked through the doorway and waited until Mr. Panglow glanced in her direction. Catching his eye, she waved him into the hallway. Listen, Phil, she began earnestly. I want you to take a look at this kid. For heaven's sake, Dolores, said Mr. Pangloss, I'm right in the middle of American Vespucci, who had little brown spots all over his arms. Little brown spots? You got me out here for little brown spots? I thought maybe measles? Oh, no, said Mr. Pangloss. Chickenpox? Said Mr. Pangloss. I'd better take a look. The two of them turned Henry to the light near the window, right in the corner where the potted plants were growing on the window ledge. Mr. Pangloss poked and prodded, and even took his eyeglasses from his pocket and put them on. Freckles, he finally said. Just Freckles. Are you sure? Mr. Pangloss' round nose twitched and he sniffed the air. Chocolate? He said. Have they brought the chocolate milk upstairs already? Forget the milk, she cried. Look, now he has them on his face. Oh, no, said Henry. Oh, yes, said Mrs. Kimmelfarber. Oh, my, said Mr. Pangloss. And they weren't there before? No, 2 minutes ago that boy's face was as clear as day, and now... Henry felt as if his heart were about to drop into his shoes. He swallowed hard and stared at the two teachers, who were staring at his face. Little brown spots all over, said Mrs. Kimmelfarber, and I see more of them coming, out even as we speak. A tear, just one, welled up into Henry's right eye and began to trickle down his cheek, running slowly in and out of the little brown spots. All right. What do you think about Henry? What are those little brown spots? Chapter 4 is Pop. I want you guys to think of what those spots may be and maybe what the teachers are going to do for Henry about those little brown spots. And I'll read chapter 4 next time.